Hi everyone, my name is Paul Goodwin and in this video I'll be presenting my paper titled The Relative Influence of Advice from Human Experts and Statistical Methods on Forecasting Adjustments. This was published in the Journal of Behavioral Decision Making, and I wrote the paper with four co-authors, Dilek Onkel, Mary Thompson, Sinan Gonal and Andrew Pollock. Okay, so the paper addressed the research question that you can see on the screen there. Do people trust forecasts from humans more than those produced by computer algorithms? So where did the idea for the paper come from? Well, in other research such as that I conducted with Robert Fields and other authors in companies, we found that company forecasters frequently adjust computer-based forecasts using their judgments. These are normally forecasts of sales in companies. So they run the computer algorithm, look at the forecasts, and they can't resist making adjustments to them. The graph shows four companies, and you can see the percentage of forecasts that they adjusted. Pharmaceutical company adjusting over 60% of the computer-based forecasts. A well-known food manufacturer over 90%, a domestic cleaning products company adjusting around 60% of its forecasts, and a retailer adjusting about 8%. But they actually had over 26,000 products or SKUs to forecast, so 8% of that is an awful lot of adjustment. So people run their computer algorithms, but it seems that they can't resist making adjustments to them. Now, why is this a concern? Well, judgmental adjustments can be biased and they may often damage accuracy. Here are the results from the same paper that I referred to earlier, the Fields et al. Paper, results from three companies. And what the graph shows is the fact that the size of the adjustments were divided into four groups. The smallest 25%, the next largest 25%, an even larger set of 25% adjustments, and then the very largest adjustments. And they're also divided into whether the adjustments were positive, in other words, the forecast was made higher, or negative, in which case the forecast was reduced. And on the left-hand axis, we show the percentage improvements in accuracy, the average percentage improvements in accuracy. And you can see the smallest positive adjustments tended to reduce accuracy. They couldn't reduce it by very much because they're only small adjustments, changing a forecast of 1,000 units to 998, for example. So you can see that as the adjustments got bigger, they tended to improve accuracy. But if you look at the positive adjustments, those are the left-hand bars, you can see that they didn't really have much of an impact on improving accuracy. And that suggests a lot of them were actually reducing accuracy. So small adjustments and positive adjustments, upwards adjustments in particular, tended to reduce accuracy. So if a lot of the adjustments weren't working, why were people spending so much time making adjustments? Why so many adjustments? Well, one explanation is political manipulation. People inflate the forecasts in order to attract more funding to their department. Or in some cases, they may even reduce the forecasts in order to say, hey, we've beaten our forecast yet again, aren't we doing well? So there's a lot of political manipulation in forecasting. People change things to make themselves look good because the changing the forecast serves some political interest. Another possible reason is people are confusing forecasts with targets or decisions. For example, they may set very high sales targets to try and encourage people to improve their efforts to increase sales, even though they may believe that the target is not really a realistic possibility, not really a realistic forecast. So people often confuse forecasts with targets or decisions or budgets and so on, and they make adjustments accordingly. There's also the possibility that when they look at the sales graph, they see all the ripples, the up and down movements, and they start seeing false patterns in the randomness. And they think the computer has missed these important patterns in past sales, and they project these forward, even though in reality, they're really random patterns. Another possible reason is optimism bias. People in companies are often very optimistic about their pet projects and their pet products, and they tend to overinflate their expectations of what will be achieved. And that may account for a lot of the upwards adjustments not being particularly accurate. Sometimes forecasters make adjustments just to show they're doing the job. If you just press the button and run the computer, it doesn't suggest you're paying much attention to the task of forecasting. So often people make these small adjustments, make 500, 502, for example, or 1,996, just to show that you're alive and kicking and doing your job. But there's another reason why people might make all these adjustments, even though they're not necessarily beneficial to forecast accuracy. And that's a lack of trust in computer-based forecasts. And this is the factor that we decided to research for this paper. Do people lack trust in forecasts that come from computers? So how did the research proceed? Well, it was an experimental-based research project. 76 business students at a university in Turkey participated in the experiment. And they were shown graphs, like the one on the right of the screen, of real weekly closing prices of 30 stocks on the Istanbul Stock Exchange. And these were presented to them in random order. So depending on who you are, you've got a particular ordering of these 30 graphs. And the participants were asked to make point forecasts, single figure forecasts, and also prediction intervals of the prices for just 1 week ahead. So they're asked to say, what do you think the price will be? And give, for example, a 95% band within which you think the price will actually land. So they're asked to make different types of forecasts for just 1 week ahead, and they made these for each of the 30 stocks. They were then provided with advice in the form of external forecasts. So having made their own forecast, they were told, well, this is what external forecasts might be recommending. And they were invited to adjust their own forecasts if they thought that the advice could improve them. The participants were randomly assigned into one of two groups. Group one were told that the external forecasts that they were provided with came from a financial expert. And this was in fact the truth. They were forecasts from a real financial expert. But the second group were told that the forecasts were generated by a statistical model. But both groups received identical forecasts. So group two weren't told the truth. They were told that these were statistical forecasts. We measured the extent to which people adjusted their initial forecasts towards or away from the advised forecasts by using a very simple measure, which we called shift. And this took the difference between the adjusted forecast and the participants' initial forecast and divided that by the external forecast, less the initial forecast. So for example, if that shift value exceeds 0.5, it means the participants moved more towards the advice and farther away from their initial forecast. If that shift value has a value of less than 0.5 or between 0.5 and 0, it means that their adjusted forecast still remained closer to their initial estimate of what the price would be. And we applied this measure to the bounds of the prediction intervals and to the point forecasts. So what were our findings? Well, people in both groups did change their forecasts when they received the external advice. They all made changes. But those who were told the forecast came from a human expert shifted their forecasts much closer to the external forecast than those who believed they came from a statistical model. Now, because we basically had three different types of adjustment, we had the adjustment to the point forecast and the adjustments to the bounds of the prediction intervals, we used multivariate ANOVA to test to see whether the differences between the two groups were significant, and they were. We had a p-value of less than 0.001. And a second follow-up study within the paper found similar results. So the conclusion we drew was that people trusted the human expert more than the statistical model. They moved their adjusted forecasts closer to the human expert's forecasts than they did to those that they thought emanated from a statistical model. So what possible explanations of this? Well, since our paper was produced, a term that has come into common use is algorithm aversion. And this was first introduced in a paper by Dietforst et al. In 2015. And the theory is that all forecasts inevitably involve errors, not least because of noise and randomness. Very few forecasts are perfectly spot on. But people appear to be more tolerant of human errors than they do of errors resulting from algorithms. People often quote sat-navs. If a sat-nav takes you on the wrong route, you're very angry. You say, this shouldn't have happened. Algorithms should be accurate. Whereas if a human person gets it wrong and sets you off on the wrong road on your route, you're probably going to be more tolerant. To err is human, as they say. So one idea is that people are more tolerant of human errors than they are of algorithmic errors. And in forecasting, the inevitable errors that occur make them very skeptical about the accuracy of algorithms. And it's called algorithm aversion. Of course, within our paper, there's another possible explanation. We did tell people that the forecast came from a financial expert, and the word expert may have some allure that attracts them more than the mere statistical model. Expert makes you think that the forecasts were bound to be quite accurate. So that may have had an effect as well. And this is the case, even though in stock market forecasting is an area where experts don't often perform well. Expertise in stock market forecasting is often not evident. So those are the possible explanations. Algorithm aversion was probably the most plausible explanation. Of course, all research has limitations. So what are the possible limitations of this study? Well, the participants were students. They did not receive a reward for accurate forecasting. Of course, real people trying to make the forecasts of future share or stock prices, they'd be doing it in the hope of making money. So it may be that the students lacked the incentive, but that doesn't explain why the two groups should be different. And students are often used as proxies for decision makers and managers, and often they're found to be good proxies. Nevertheless, it's a potential limitation. There's also an ethical consideration here. Was it really legitimate to misrepresent the true source of the forecast to one of the groups? Is it ethical to tell them that the forecast came from a statistical model, to tell them a lie, in fact, when the forecast came from a financial expert? I don't think anybody was harmed through this, but a lot of people might find that a little bit difficult. So it's worth, when you're designing a study, these days, many studies have to go through before ethical committees, and it's worth bearing that in mind, I think. So what were the implications of our study? Well, as we've seen, people in companies spend an awful lot of time adjusting statistical forecasts, and yet this has the result of reducing accuracy. In another study we did, we found that managers spent 17 hours a month in meetings adjusting forecasts, only for 50% of them to improve. So all of these adjustments, all of this lack of trust of statistical forecasts can actually waste an awful lot of time in addition to reducing accuracy. So the implication is we need to find ways of encouraging people to trust statistical forecasts more so that they avoid these harmful time-wasting adjustments. So how can we do that? Well, a later study by Dietforst suggested that you should let people make slight adjustments to algorithmic forecasts. This makes people feel they've got some control over what they're doing. And this feeling of in control makes them more likely to accept algorithms in the future and to use algorithms. Nevertheless, making slight adjustments can be time wasting, and as we've seen, they tend to reduce accuracy, although they can do little damage to accuracy by definition because they're very small adjustments. But we need to give people a feeling of control, I think, to make them more accepting of statistical forecasts. Okay, so just to give you a reference, the paper that this talk is based on, the details of it are given there with all the authors, the title, and the actual edition of the journal that covered this paper. So that's for reference, in case anybody wants to cite the paper. And thank you very much for listening. If you've got any questions, my email address is there, and I'll be happy to respond to give you more details of the paper. Thank you very much.